Welcome, sinners and scholars. Quote the Annals, Part 1. The Fall of the House of Poe. I'm your host, Rab Greason, Keeper of Nevermore. This October, the Annals don't just knock upon your chamber door. We come through the floorboards, through the coffin lid, through the cracks in your sanity. Because if there is any ghost we must conjure when nights are longest, it's Edgar Allan Poe. The man who turned mourning into music, who sold grief by the stanza, who dressed corpses in rhyme and called it love. He even wrote it himself, The Fall of the House of Usher, a story of cursed bloodline, a woman buried alive, and a mansion that split and sank in the swamp. But the real fall wasn't in his fiction, it was in his own house. Poe's family scattered, his cousin bride wasting away, his name sinking into ruin. Tonight, we open not just the scroll, but the House of Poe itself. So raise the scroll, but be aware, tonight's syllabus isn't approved by any English department still accepting donations. But before we raise him from the grave, a warning. Edgar Allan Poe didn't write fairy tales. He wrote of brides buried alive, of cats that clawed through walls, of hearts that thumped from beneath the floorboards. He married a girl of 13. He watched her rot on a decade-long deathbed. He drowned his grief in drink and scandal, in obsessions so dark that even his enemies couldn't decide if he was mad, or simply too honest about what haunted him. So this is your warning. Tonight's scroll is full of death, disease, lust, shame, addiction, betrayal, premature burial, and one of the strangest deaths in American letters. If you came here for a polite literature lesson, be gone! The library is down the street. If you came here for a safe history class, close the book now and leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart and take thy form from off my door. Quote the Raven, nevermore. So if you want to see how one man's greatest shame became his only muse, if you want to follow the lust and the grief into the grave itself, then turn the page with us. Come, let the burial rite be read, the funeral song be sung, an anthem for the queenliest dead that ever died so young. This is one Up the Annals, where shame becomes legend, the Raven and Lenore live on, and tonight, the legend answers, nevermore. Edgar Allan Poe, let's go! Act 1. The After Dark Genius. Every writer has a muse. For Edgar Allan Poe, it wasn't money, it wasn't fame, it was a corpse. Poe wasn't just America's first goth. He was the poet of the morgue, the man who made death desirable, who tried to teach us the most beautiful thing in the world is a young woman dying. That obsession began with his mother, Eliza Poe, an actress only 24, coughing blood until she collapsed in a Richmond boarding house. And it ended with his wife, Virginia Clem, a girl who wasted away for a decade, her body turning to ash on a deathbed she entered at 13 years old. Between those deaths, Poe found his rhythm. He would turn shame into beauty, grief into art, lust into a ledger. He buried his beloved, then sell you the poem for $4 a page. So tonight we're not asking if Poe was scandalous. We're asking what happens when a man's greatest shame becomes his only muse. Act 2. The Trauma Factory. Edgar Allan Poe was born into chaos in 1809. His parents, both traveling actors, lived on the edge of respectability. In their day, theater was one step above vagrancy and maybe one step below prostitution. His father drank and eventually disappeared. His mother, Eliza, died of tuberculosis before Edgar was 3. He and his siblings watched her cough herself to death in a Richmond boarding house. The first woman he ever loved became the first beautiful dead woman. The nuclear family died too and scattered like ash to the wind. His brother William turned to drinking and died young. His sister Rosalie was whispered about as being illegitimate, treated like a charity case, possibly simple-minded. Edgar alone was taken in by John and Frances Allen, wealthy Richmond merchants. But he was never adopted. He carried the Allen name without belonging to it. He was pampered one day and scolded the next, raised in privilege, but never given security. That insecurity followed him. At the University of Virginia, John Allen gave him less than a third of the money he needed. Poe turned to gambling to make up the difference. Within months, he racked up $2,000 in debts. Tens of thousands today. He left UVA humiliated, owing money he could never repay. And just when he thought love might save him, shame stole that too. His first fiancée, Sarah Elmira Royster, the woman he adored, never even saw his letters. Her father burned them, certain Edgar was a bad match. Elmira assumed Poe had abandoned her and married another man. To Edgar, it was proof. Any chance that stability would be stolen, censored, or tossed to the fire, its love reduced to ash. Gambling debt, love letters burned, and a man named Poe. If shame were a university, he'd already have tenure. But Poe had a knack for reinvention. He enlisted in the U.S. Army under the name Edgar A. Perry, and quickly rose to Sergeant Major, the top rank for a non-commissioned officer. For once, as an NCO, his future looked steady. Then, he sabotaged it. He secured a place at West Point only to refuse roll calls, skip duties, and drink his way into a court-martial. Expelled once again. This pattern, climbing towards stability, then setting fire to the ladder, would follow him all his life. He later gave it a name, the Imp of the Perverse. The irresistible urge to do exactly the thing that will ruin you. It's not just psychology, it's lust inverted. Not the lust for a woman, but for collapse itself. The craving to ruin, to fall, to make art out of ashes. By the time Poe left the military, the cycle was set. Loss, obsession, self-destruction, and words. And those words would become his only inheritance, and his only weapon. Act 3. The Mausoleum Marriage. In 1836, Poe married his 14-year-old cousin, Virginia Clem. He was 27. On the marriage certificate, her age was altered to 21. An early act of paperwork fiction that still reeks today. But in Richmond, everyone knew the truth. Why? Historians debate whether their marriage was sexual or fraternal, but the deeper truth is psychological. Poe had lost parents, siblings, and surrogate family. By marrying Virginia and keeping her mother Maria Clem in the household, he tried to wall himself off from abandonment. His marriage wasn't just a romance. It was a barricade, a mausoleum built out of the last blood he could still call family. But mausoleums don't hold life, do they? Within a few years, Virginia coughed blood, struck with tuberculosis. Poe once called it a 7-year deathbed, where every night you'd go to sleep with the possibility of her last breath. She coughed at the piano, sang despite the sickness, and wasted away inch by inch before him. Years earlier, Poe had written The Fall of the House of Usher, a story of a cursed bloodline, incestuous whispers, a woman buried alive, and a mansion splitting into the swamp. But it wasn't just Gothic imagination, it was prophecy. Because the House of Poe was falling the same way. Siblings scattered, a cousin bride fading in the next room, and the walls of his world closing in. And Poe, true to form, turned it into literature. The Masque of the Red Death. Plague crashing a masquerade, as if Virginia's blood-splattered handkerchief had infected an entire ballroom. Annabel Lee, a love poem to a dead girl, written like a defense brief against heaven itself. Even angels couldn't keep us apart. And The Raven, a widower haunted by the memory of his Lenore. That single poem made him a household name, printed everywhere, memorized by children, and for it, he was paid $9. The irony was cruel. His wife's illness gave him the stories that made him famous, but never gave him money. Poe had created the foundations of America's Gothic tradition and was still begging editors for change. And all the while, rumors spread Poe flirted with poet Frances Sargent Osgood. Another poet, Elizabeth Elliot, grew jealous and accused him of improper letters. The scandal seeped into his household like another infection. Virginia knew. She joked bitterly about his other lady friends, even as she rotted beside him. When Virginia finally died in 1847 at just 24 years old, Poe unraveled. He courted women as if chasing substitutes, tried to kill himself with laudanum, and drowned deeper in drink. But the pattern was already complete. Virginia's slow death had given him the poems that never die, and in return, it left him in his world, once again, alone. This was Poe's real lust. Not for blooming life, but for decline, for the beauty of collapse, for a love so fragile it only became immortal once it was embalmed in verse. He turned his own marriage into a mausoleum and sold tickets at the door. Act 4. The Death of the Author. October 3rd, 1849. Baltimore, Election Day. The city is chaos. Taverns doubled as polling places, gangs prowl the streets, and whiskey, sweat, and politics fill the air. Baltimore's elections are notorious at this time for corruption, bribes, fists, and blood decide as much as ballots. Fights break out at every corner and rumors swirl about gangs that will do anything to fix a vote. And in front of one such polling place, a tavern called Gunner's Hall, a man collapses in the gutter. His clothes are filthy, ill-fitting, and clearly not his own. He's raving, incoherent, and near death. A typesetter named Joseph Walker finds him and rushes to get help. He sends a note to Dr. Joseph Snodgrass, one of Poe's acquaintances, begging him to come at once. The man is in great distress and in need of immediate assistance. The man in the gutter is Edgar Allan Poe. He's taken to Washington College Hospital. Poe lingers between madness and lucidity. Sometimes he raves, sometimes he prays. He keeps calling out for someone named Reynolds. No one knows who that is. Ghost, conspirator. He thrashes when offered water, refuses alcohol, collapses again into silence. No visitors record a full conversation. He never regains the clarity to explain what happened. On Sunday, October 7th, 1849, Edgar Allan Poe dies. He is 40 years old. His last words, "Lord, help my poor soul." America's first Gothic celebrity ends not with a masterpiece, but a mutter. Not with applause, but in filthy clothes that weren't his. He gave us ravens, Red Death, and premature burials, but his own end was uglier than any tale he told. Unless it was the imp of the perverse, taking one last bow. The mystery that never died. No autopsy was performed. The hospital records vanished. His official cause of death was written as phrenitis, a polite 19th century way of saying swelling of the brain. Or more bluntly, we don't know what it is, but let's blame the bottle. And so Poe's death became the very thing he mastered in life, a mystery. But the theories that followed weren't solutions. They were mirrors reflecting back the shame and scandal people already believed. Alcoholism. Many insisted he drank himself to death. Poe's critics leapt on the story. The mad drunk, delirious in a gutter, finally swallowed whole by the bottle. It was an ending too perfect for the caricature Rufus Griswold who would soon sell. But there's a problem. Poe was never a heavy drinker. He was a lightweight. One glass of wine could knock him flat. Friends swore he was sober when he left Richmond just days earlier, even signing pledges of temperance. This theory feels more like slander than fact. Rabies. In the 1990s, a physician named Dr. Michael Benitez studied Poe's symptoms and concluded they looked exactly like rabies. The hydrophobia, the delirium, the sudden decline, it all fit. Some whispered that perhaps he was bitten by an animal, maybe even his beloved cat Katerina. Poetic justice or karmic hairball? You decide. The thought is almost poetic, Poe undone by the very creature he adored. After all, he once wrote The Black Cat, a tale where a man is haunted, clawed, and destroyed by the feline he tried to silence. Was nature writing Poe's own final Gothic parody? But no bite was ever recorded, and in 1849, rabies was as good as a death sentence no matter what anyway. Syphilis, tuberculosis, tumors. Others speculated syphilis eating his brain, or tuberculosis, the family plague, finally putting him into his grave. Still others whispered about a brain tumor, after doctors decades later reported a strange calcified mass in his skull. And here's the morbid question. Did Poe suffer from a tumor all along? Did it twist his moods, drive his compulsions, sharpen his hallucinations? Did the same disease that killed him also make his genius possible? Each theory sounds plausible. None can be proven. And then there's the most annals-worthy theory of them all, cooping. Baltimore gangs would roam the streets on Election Day, snatching up victims. They'd drug them, beat them, disguise them in rags or costumes, and march them from polling place to polling place. Each man forced to vote again and again for the gang's candidate. And when the victim could no longer stand, he was tossed aside like garbage. Poe was found on Election Day outside a polling place, in filthy, ill-fitting clothes. It fits too perfectly. If this is the truth, then the man who invented detective fiction died as a disposable pawn in the stupidest crime of all, voter fraud. An intellectual giant reduced to a political puppet. The final irony. It's poetic in the darkest way. Poe, who wrote about premature burial, dies without an explanation and is buried in an unmarked grave. Poe, who lived the imp of the perverse, sabotaging every chance at stability, meets an end that feels like self-destruction even if it wasn't. At the moment he was finally on the verge of redemption, newly engaged to his childhood sweetheart, Elmira Royster, with money and stability on the horizon, Poe vanishes and reappears as a broken man in borrowed clothes. The final insult, the America's master of originality, dies dressed like a plagiarism victim. Stripped of even his own name and fabric, reduced to a parody of himself. The writer who accused rivals of stealing his words ends up buried in words and garments not his own. The mystery of his death is the cruelest irony of all. The detective of American literature, killed by a case no one could solve. Edgar Allan Poe died in delirium, dressed in another man's clothes, begging for help that never came. He left behind more questions than answers. But his obsessions live on. The lust, the shame, the corpses he turned into poetry. And so as October deepens, the annals will stay in the shadows. Every tale this month comes dressed in black. Every story drips with the same cold breath that rattled through Poe's chamber. This is only part one. Next, we open the grave wider. We'll exhume the scandals, the enemies, the betrayals that fed on his body even after death. and we'll see how Rufus Griswold, Poe's greatest rival, made sure the legend of a mad drunk outlived the man himself. This is One Up the Annals, where shame becomes legend, the Raven and Lenore live on, and through this Halloween month, so do the lusts that made him immortal. For in these October nights, the legend answers, nevermore. Good night.